Hey worlders, welcome back to my channel. My name is Emma, and somehow we've entered the 5th month of Jumanji, and we're in May. This year has been crazy, but I'd rather focus on some positive stuff, which is all the books that I read in the month of April. I am really excited actually about the books I read. Every book except for one got above 3 stars for me this month. I gave one 3-star and the rest was 4 or 5 stars, which is awesome. I had a great reading month. I also was able to get a lot of books on Book Outlet, which I'm really excited about. Just overall, a really good reading month. Unfortunately, the world is not in the best circumstances, and my writing is not in the best circumstances, but my reading, it's on point. So as usual, for my wrap-ups, I'm going to give some statistics. I'm going to put my graphs, I think they're normally on this side of the screen, so you can see this month's statistics compared to past months, and as always my stats are on my phone, so if I'm looking down, that's why. In the month of April, I read 6 books, which is the most amount of books read in a month so far for me. I read 1,659 pages and listened to 13.32 hours of audio, or I finished a book that was 13.32 is probably a better way of stating that. I acquired 11 books. In genres this month, I read 3 contemporaries, 1 fantasy, and 2 mysteries. I listened to 1 audiobook and read 5 physical books. I read 2 adult books and 4 young adult books. And unfortunately, especially with the books I currently own, I did not do well with my gender identity or my race identities. Again, it was 6 and 6 with cis and white authors. From what I could find online, as always, if you know something about the author, maybe the way they gender identify or anything like that, correct me in the comments so I can fix my statistics. I am trying to broaden the books that I buy and the types of authors that I buy from, but it is taking some time, so I'm basing it off of what I have when I wasn't paying attention. With that being said, let's talk about the 6 books that I read. The first book that I finished in January was One of Us is Next by Karen M. McManus, and it is the sequel to One of Us is Lying. In One of Us is Next, there are 3 main characters, one of which is the younger sister of one of the main characters from One of Us is Lying, and they start getting anonymous text messages, the whole school is, based around a dangerous game of truth or dare, where basically a random person will be given a truth or dare and they have to respond within 24 hours or a truth about themselves gets released, and the 3 main characters are the 3 characters most affected by the game of truth or dare. I really enjoyed this book. It was actually, in my opinion, better than One of Us is Lying. I liked the characters more. I liked the focus a little bit more. I was much more intrigued by the premise of a dangerous game of truth or dare. But what I didn't like was how quickly the game of truth or dare kind of went onto the back burner. I would say it was only really the primary focus for probably about 1/3 to half of the book, and that was such an interesting premise to me, and the reason that it happened made sense, but I would have loved to read just a book about a dangerous game of truth or dare. If you're looking for a book like this, if you read this book and you're looking for a book like this, there's a book by Natalie D. Richards called Gone Too Far, and I would recommend it. It's kind of similar with the game, the dangerous game of truth or dare. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. I just want to give a heads up for anyone that's interested in reading this book. I would consider trigger warnings of alcoholism and sexual harassment. The second book I finished in the month of April was The Babysitters Coven by Kate Williams. This book I actually bought in my last Black Friday haul when I was really disappointed by Barnes & Noble's sales, but I'm so glad I bought it. This book follows the main character named Esme, who is kind of an outcast in her school. She really only has one other friend. I know, very YA. And she is really into her babysitting job. But things start to get weird at her babysitting jobs, and then this mysterious new girl moves to town, and a lot of questions about her family's past kind of get brought to the surface in a very mystical way. and I loved it. It's the first in a series. I'm not sure if it's a duology, a trilogy, or just like a standard series. I know that the next one comes out in like September, and I'm definitely gonna get it when it comes out because I'm very excited about it. And I'm actually surprised by how much I love this book because I'm not a big fantasy reader. This is a very light fantasy though, which is probably why I like it. And after reading this, I'm a little bit more willing to venture into the light fantasy side. I still don't see myself reading those big epic fantasy series or anything, but I'm willing to kind of venture into it a little bit more. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars out of 5. For trigger warnings, mental health plays a big part in this novel, and a lot of it is like negative stigmas about mental health and like misdiagnosis. I really hope that wasn't a spoiler, but like it's not just like it's hard to explain. Like there's parts that take place in a psych ward and stuff like that, so just be aware. The third book I finished in April was an audiobook, and it was What Alice Remembers by Leanne Moriarty. This book follows Alice, who falls at the gym one day, and when she wakes up she thinks it's 10 years earlier, so she thinks she's still 28 instead of 38, and she's trying to piece together what happened in her life and her marriage to get her to where she is now. So this book was a book I was so excited about. If you guys watched my last wrap up for March, you know that I was obsessed with Big Little Lies. All I wanted to do was read more Leanne Moriarty, and this book kind of disappointed me. A big part of it though I think has to do with like my age and my life experience. I feel like if I had read this 10, 15 years from now, I maybe could have related to the main character in the story a little bit more. There were times that I was almost like checking myself and being like, you're 26 and still a little naive, girl, which I don't think is kind of the point of the book. But something else that really was like hard for me to read was the fact that she had 3 children, and I work with kids day in and day out. I know kind of where they would be developmentally age-wise, especially for kids between kindergarten and 4th grade, which is the main age group I work with, and was also the age of all of her children. Her oldest was supposed to be about 10 years old. She read as a high schooler to me, or even a middle school, but more of a high schooler to me. Like, 4th graders can have a little bit of an attitude, but like this was just, it felt like 13-year-old, 14-year-old attitude to me. And then the middle child was supposed to be like 7, and he read like a 10-year-old to me. Like I could think of so many kids in my program that I had known when they were like 7 that like he was reading more like what they were like when they were 10. And then the daughter was probably the closest. She was supposed to be 5, but she was still reading to me at like a 7 or 8-year-old. And maybe that's just how like kids in Australia are. Maybe they do mature a little faster because of life circumstances, but to me they just read too old, which made the time frame harder because the oldest daughter, the mom was pregnant when she remembers. So like when she like wakes up, she's 38, but she thinks she's still 28, and she was pregnant with the oldest daughter when she was 28. So like the kids have to be within that 10-year span. So there were times that I was reading it and I'm like, she feels like she's 14, and then they'll be like, but 10 years ago, and I was just like, this was hard. So that was really more of a me thing, I think. I don't know, I haven't gone and like looked at other reviews, but it honestly is kind of interesting because Big Little Lies was my favorite book in the month of March, whereas What Alice Remembered is my least favorite book in April. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was the one 3-star book that I read this month. The 4th book I read in April was The Felon Boyfriend by Casey West. This book follows Gia, whose boyfriend dumps her literally seconds before she's supposed to walk into the prom, and she has this friend who questions everything she does. So Gia decides to ask a random stranger in the parking lot to pretend to be her boyfriend at prom, saying that he can basically like dump her at the end of the night so her friends think she got broken up with. And he agrees, and then a few more times they kind of play like fake dating. So last year, in like the middle of the year, I won a Goodreads giveaway arc of, I want to say it's called When It Happens. Hi, editing me. I looked it up. The book is actually called Maybe This Time, not When It Happens. All my feelings and the rest of those thoughts though are correct
And sorry about the crazy hair.
And I did do a book talk on it, so I'll link that up above. And I didn't love the book, so I was kind of concerned that I wouldn't really love Casey West. And then at the end of the year, I read By Your Side, and I loved it. I actually think it ended up being on like my favorite books of 2019, but I loved it. So I was like, this book is going to be a good kind of tell if I'm like a Casey West fan or like a not so much fan. And I think I'm a Casey West fan. I loved this book. There were parts that I didn't love. I thought it was going to be centered a little bit more around fake dating than it was. It was like an interesting take on fake dating, but it wasn't what I was expecting. So I was a little disappointed by that, but not too much. I loved the characters. I love that Casey West is this very light contemporary writer, but she often has some sort of handle on some sort of mental health because it makes her characters feel more realistic. In By Your Side, there's a big anxiety storyline. This one had a lot to do with self-esteem and toxic friendships and being a good friend and that kind of stuff. So there's a big message in it, which is great for YA books, but taking it in a very light contemporary way. And I just really enjoyed it. I wish I knew about Casey West when I was in high school because I would have devoured books by her then. And I mean, I still do. I think I read most of these in about 2 or 3 settings, and I actually ordered more Casey West books.
Editing me here once again. I realized that I never gave you guys my rating for the Felon Boyfriend in the original one, and now I have to look it up because I forgot what it was. I think it's like 4 something, but let's see. I'm on my Goodreads right now. 2 books. I have to finish 2 books and I'll hit my goal for the year. Like, what? There, Felon Boyfriend. I gave it 4 stars. So, Felon Boyfriend by Casey West, 4-star book for me.
My blush is so red, and I can't tell if it's because I overdid my blush or because I'm hot. Because it's warm out today. The 5th book I finished in April was Michigan vs. the Boys by Carrie S. Allen. I loved this book. It was my favorite book of the month, and I just want to start talking about it now, but let me first give you guys the summary. So this book is about Michigan, and she grew up in Michigan, and she plays hockey. But the girls' hockey team gets cut from her high school, so she needs to find another way to play hockey. She watches like her friends, one goes to a boarding school, a couple of them are like, oh, we'll just play on like the adult league, we're 18. A few of them are able to like go to another town that's like 30-40 minutes away and play on their hockey team, but those aren't really options for Michigan, so she decides to try out for the boys hockey team and makes it because she is like skating circles around the boys, and I loved it. So I don't even I don't even know where I want to start with how much I loved this book. It was recommended to me by Books and Lala in a book video that she did, and I can't even remember which one it was or if she liked it, but it just sounded like such an interesting premise to me. I love sports books. I'm not a big athlete, but I love sports books, and I love when girls play on boys teams because I love the whole idea of like anything you can do, I can do too kind of thing. And I loved that, but something I loved even, I keep saying loved, sorry. Something that I thought was awesome about this book was it wasn't like she's the man where like, yeah, you're good enough to make the team, but you're not that great and you instead need like one of the players to like coach you kind of thing. Like she was good on her own. She wasn't like constantly having to like prove that she deserved the spot. Like she was like their leading scorer, like she was good. Her talent was like her own, and I loved that because there is a romance in it, but it's not between hockey players. So Michigan really gets to kind of be the star on her own. Whether like realistically it would be like that if this was a real store, if this was like a real girl, I'm not really sure, but I really loved that she wasn't having to rely on someone else to make her a better player or to help her become another player. I feel like that is often done in these kind of books. But the other thing I loved about it is I have never read a book that got me so mad I was crying. So a big part of this book is that the boys refuse to accept Michigan. I don't want to go into too much detail on this. Like I said earlier, I work with kids and I'm always worried about them finding my channel. So I try to keep like what I talk about at a very like PG level, but like imagine all the hazing that like men would do to women, and like it happens in this book. And I got so mad so many times, especially because one of the characters that like should have been her advocate and almost felt like they were going on to her team, like as soon as she like voiced the stuff that was happening to her, turned his back on her. And then like the main perpetrator, I think Carrie S. Ellen did such a good job almost talking about something that is so relevant in media, is the idea that we're still victim blaming often, and there would be these like very minuscule moments that the villain of the book almost felt like he could be good, and like I would catch myself being like, no, don't let that trick you, like remember everything else he did. And I really liked that about it, because there were a few times that I was like, oh, maybe he could become a likable character, and it's like, no, he's not, he's bad, you need to remember what else he's done. And I loved that aspect, and I'm really hoping that I'm like portraying that the right way in what I'm trying to say, because I'm kind of being vague about it. But I loved this book. It was only 299 pages. It was the perfect length, and like the focus was so there, and it just felt so realistic, and I got so angry that I wanted to cry. Like, I loved it. I remember when I was making my 5-star prediction video, I was like contemplating putting this on my list, and I didn't. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe I'll save it for the next time I do a 5-star prediction. But I would like, when it came up in my random draw, I was like, no, I don't want to wait. So I read it and I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars, and I recommend it. Like, if you can do hard-hitting contemporaries, I recommend it. I got some trigger warnings for you, I'll give you in a moment, but like, I loved it. Loved it. Like, I want to reread it already. That's how much I loved it. As for trigger warnings, there is trigger warnings of physical abuse, sexual abuse, and other forms of hazing. And then the final book I read this month was An Unwanted Guest by Sherry LaPena. This book came in at the final moment, and I low-key read it really quickly just so that I could give myself 6 books for this month. But this book is about a bunch of people, a couple of couples, some single people, who all go to upstate New York to stay in a hotel for the weekend. And they don't seem to know each other. Like, the couples obviously know each other, but it's not like double dates or like a reunion or anything like that. Like, they're all going up for their own reason. And then only the owner of the hotel and the owner's son are at the hotel because a huge storm hits and the power ends up going out, and they're all snowed in at the hotel. And then some murders start to happen. So I read The Couple Next Door by Sherry LaPena, and I was like, I like this author, but I'm not sure if I'm going to love everything she wrote. I ended up liking this, I believe, more. I believe I gave it a higher rating than The Couple Next Door. If not, I enjoyed it more than I thought I did, and my rating styles have definitely changed since I read The Couple Next Door. So there's that. It was kind of creepy. Like, I read before I go to bed, and like there were nights that like that was what was running through my head before I went to bed. And like I was kind of like about it a little bit. Normally I put a sticky where like I am at the point where I'm like, oh, I think this person did it, but I didn't here. Anyways though, I ended up being wrong. I think my theory about why that character would have made a good suspect would have been good, but it wasn't the right answer. I was wrong. They ended up being one of the victims later on in the book, so obviously when they died I was like, huh, can't be them. But when I like got towards the end, like right before like the whodunit reveal, I like realized something about the writing style that I hadn't really before, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. And then like the motive was kind of disappointing, but there were like other things that the author described the killer having done that I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I'd like seen some people complain about the motive not making sense, that there was no way you could have figured it out. And I actually recommended this book to my mom, and I'm going to try to get her to read it soon, because my mom is like a master at picking out who it is, and I want to see if she could figure out who did it before the reveal, to see if my theory that like if you're paying attention to other things you may have noticed. But I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I did enjoy it. If you're looking for a good creepy mystery, this one might be it. Although it might be a good winter read more than like summer read, because it does take place in a winter storm. If you're like someone who likes to read books that like match the season, I don't really care, to be honest. But I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. Also, trigger warnings in An Unwanted Guest. There is some like very big PTSD mentions and descriptions in the novel, as one of the characters is suffering from PTSD. And then there is a really quick, only like a couple page scene discussing rape. And those are all the books I read in April. I did a lot of reading this month and I really enjoyed most of what I read. I hope that you are staying safe through this whole pandemic, and hopefully in the near future we won't be having to stay home as much and we can get back to somewhat normal lives. If you are an essential employee, thank you so much for all that you're doing and all the risks that you're taking. I know that I really appreciate it, and I know that the rest of the world does too. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye. Or, I'm sorry, I totally messed up. Look, there are I'm getting myself all nervous at work. Oh my god, I just lost my train of thought.